Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ladies of the PGS. I am your host, here tonight. And tonight we have with us Catherine Cook. Catherine, how are you tonight?
Good.
Good. I'm glad that you're here. Thank you so much for being here on Ladies of the PGS tonight. And you know, Catherine, it is the day before Halloween. I know there are a lot of people who are excited over the weekend. A lot of people have gone to Halloween parties, and certainly tomorrow is the big day with costumes and everything. And as I was telling you a few minutes ago, I'm in the process of getting my mom's costume ready, even though she's not as enthusiastic about it as she was when I first bought them. But I think it's going to be fantastic this Halloween. I'm very excited to see what she looks like in this. And I certainly will send you a picture. But, of course, we heard this news about a star that I grew up watching on the show Friends. And of course, it's Matthew Perry. Catherine, Matthew Perry has suffered for a while with addiction. And certainly, he's been someone who I've seen so much of his work. And this was in an era where he was in a show that was number one. And not only was it number one when it was on the air and, during its normal ratings period, but then it went on to syndication for 20, 30 years, Catherine. I don't even know anybody who hasn't seen the show. But it is sad to hear that he's passed away. And I know they're still trying to figure out what his actual, more details about his passing. But honestly, I enjoyed him on Friends and the movies that he made. And I was sad to see him kind of pass away at such a young age. What are some of your memories of Matthew Perry, Catherine? Are you a fan of his work?
I haven't actually seen much of him outside of Friends, and that ended almost 20 years ago now. So I know he was in a couple movies and in a couple other TV shows that didn't go anywhere, and then he was supposedly on a reboot of the Odd Couple that ran for 3 years. But I haven't really been following him. I hadn't thought about him forever until that mentioned that he put his autobiography out last year.
Yeah, that's something to think about. Yeah, I was unaware that he did an autobiography as well, and I'm sure that he did talk about his struggles with addiction and trying to fight it. And certainly, he has been very open and talked about how much money has gone out trying to fight this. But he really was so fantastic on Friends, Catherine. And I have so many great memories of watching that show, not knowing what to expect. And then Matthew Perry will be the one who kind of goes in and gives us that zinger. I haven't really seen too many comedies like that since then. And certainly, I almost wonder whether the era of comedies like that has kind of gone away. But it was an extraordinary show that dominated everything. And to have a show like that, a comedy be so popular throughout the world, it was really great time for network television, especially. And here's, of course, an article on it. It says that they plan the Best of Chandler Marathon to honor Friends star Matthew Perry. I think you could probably turn to a lot of cable channels and still see Friends being broadcast somewhere. Friends, and there's a bunch of other shows still being aired. And from what they've said, they're still making residuals on this, that the show made an incredible amount of money. And I remember it going from place to place to place, knowing that I could rewatch these reruns of Friends and, just have a laugh and kind of enjoy the comedy, which I almost feel like a lot of the comedy in the show, they just wanted you to laugh. You weren't necessarily supposed to take too much of it seriously. They wanted you to just, kind of let off a little bit of steam and sit down and relax and not think about too much, because it didn't get too serious. And I did like that they had that sense of escapism for us, because, I think that their lifestyle on the show has been criticized. And I almost sat down and I said, do I really care whether or not they could afford that apartment? And, this person's job was whatever. It's like, why are we even going into that level of analysis? Was there do you think people overthink that show when it was meant purely just to make you laugh? What do you think, Catherine?
Well, people overthink everything these days. it's like I can't really I wasn't a fan of that show. I didn't think it was funny. I thought it was wildly overrated. I remember summer 2004 hanging out with friends, and they just wanted to watch their friends' DVDs, and we'd all pack onto this really tight, small couch and watch it on this tiny TV that was being propped up on these books in this room that had like nothing in it because they were in the process of moving. And at the end of every episode, I would say something to try and get them to like, hey, let's go outside and do something. But no, they just kept wanting to watch the show, and I was like, okay. But yeah, I never really think about that type of stuff when it comes to like sitcoms because they're trying to pick something which is going to look appealing for the people watching it and something that's going to be spacious enough to accommodate the crew and all the different action and stuff they want to film at the location. But yeah, I wouldn't be able to tell you what jobs the characters worked on that show because I don't remember.
Well, I remember someone looking at it and saying, and this wasn't even, let's say, in our, let's say in 2020. Not that people aren't looking at that now, but when the show was around, people had commented, well, have you ever tried to be a waitress in New York? You know, it doesn't pay that much. You probably couldn't live in an apartment like that. They'd all be in the same apartment and it would be like a 1 bedroom with bunks, you know, and they would be lucky for that. It'd be like a 6-story walk up or something, to be honest with you. But I think it's interesting that the criticism of that didn't stop the popularity of the show. The show is still very popular. There's dedicated fans. It didn't have the level of comedy sophistication that I would say its counterparts at the time had, like Seinfeld, which I felt was a very different, sophisticated show. And there's even somebody who's in the chat now, Dinner Bells, who said Seinfeld and Frasier as well. Certainly, it was not on that level. I don't think it was trying to be on that level. I think it was meant to appeal to a college crowd, even though they were not college students. Catherine, do you think it was meant for young adults?
Probably like other shows of the time, like what was it, Single Ladies 227, that other shows like that. It was basically another version of that was aimed for towards younger people because it was just about their lives and just hanging around New York and the people they dated and weird situations. It wasn't really. Then again, Seinfeld was kind of more of the same, but that hit on more the zeitgeist because of the type of things they would comment on all the time. Whereas Friends was just kind of, I felt it was more sitcom plot type oriented, whereas Seinfeld would pick something that everybody can relate to. Like the weird, like half the stories would be about the weird stuff that Jerry and Elaine's boyfriends and girlfriends would do, and the other half would just be the bizarre happenings of George and Kramer, which was just too unreal to be believed, but that's what made it funny. Whereas Friends is trying to be more down to earth in a way, and just again, typical sitcom-y type plots, like, oh, let's help somebody move in, and they've been playing the clip a lot where they're trying to bring the couch up the stairwell, and little stuff like that. So, and yeah, it's different.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that I want to point out too was that I think that the casting for that show was very specific, and it was clear that there were individuals who I felt were true comedians. Like this was their job. Like Seinfeld, we know he's a comedian. He did his stand up in the beginning of the show. He's a comedian. And certainly, as when it comes to talent, I think a lot of people can do comedy, but it's not the easiest thing to pull off. And the choice to make the show a comedy show versus like something like Beverly Hills 90210, I think wouldn't have worked for this particular context. It wouldn't work well, where it's supposed to be New York, and at least in my opinion. But I think that they also picked individuals who look like, the person next door. You had people who were like that, and they were a very good looking cast. So that was something else that I did want to mention, that they were sure to pick very attractive young people for the show. And immediately I was like, yeah, I want to watch a show about young, attractive people. Why not? Oh, it's a comedy. Yeah, I'll watch that too. Oh, they're dating each other. Yeah, I'll watch that too. So like, it was kind of fun in the sense of very adventurous. They're in New York, and there was this notion of making your dreams come true. Although it was very hard to figure out how they were going to accomplish that in the show. But certainly there was a lot of back and forth when it came to dating and being in love, and the uncertainty as these characters were trying to navigate that at the time, and what I feel is a much simpler time for relationships. But so they're talking about how they're going to do a best of Chandler marathon. And I have friends who've seen every single one of these episodes, just like Seinfeld, just like Frasier. I mean, this is not even close to the level of Frasier, let's say, in regards to a more sophisticated palette of comedy, if you will. But it was, had great ratings too. And it's funny that somebody in the chat did mention that Frasier is making a comeback. And I have a feeling that the comedy will be equally good, because knowing the actors involved, they want that level of quality. So, well, we did hear that he unfortunately passed away at 54. That's incredibly young. And here's the lineup for the marathon here. Different episodes. I don't have a favorite episode for Friends. Actually, that's a lie. I like when one of the characters got to date Tom Selleck. Like, I was like, whoever wrote this is reading my mind, like it was. But I think it was kind of like these fun events that would happen that are kind of unrealistic, but the character, because of who they are, got to kind of have fun and do that, even though it was a little unusual. But, like they're airing the episodes. You can see these episodes anywhere. And I don't even know, they might even be on one of the streaming services. But I did just want to mention Matthew Perry. He had kind of a light, airy feel about him. He had this group of friends in this show. And I did see him in a few films. I think he made a film with Salma Hayek where he falls in love with her in the story. They have kind of, this get together. It might be a one night stand. And after the one night stand, they kind of fall in love, but it is a cute,
was it Fools Rush In?
Yes, it was.
God, that was awful. That was fun. I remember hanging out with a bunch of friends and we were watching that. Somebody put it on and we knew, you could just tell from how telegraphed the whole thing is what the next scene was. And we were all like saying in unison, this is what's going to happen next. Just like the whole time. And we're like, like Salma Hayek falling for Matthew Perry, really? It's like, okay.
Yeah, well, I agree with you on that one. Yes, thank you. Thanks so much for that. Yes, Monica dated Tom Selleck, and I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw it, because she was, I guess maybe they were doing nothing more than dating and screwing around. That's essentially what it was. And, like they had a relationship before, it didn't work out. And then she saw him again and they like rekindled whatever they had. And she was bragging. She was bragging about how good it was. And I thought to myself, this show it kind of like turned into a bit of a guilty pleasure, because so much of the stuff on there was unrealistic. However, I still watched it. So I don't know. But I am going to say that I don't know whether a show like this, I mean, I think people still watch it, but it's going to be in syndication forever, right, Catherine? They're never going to stop airing Friends. What do you think?
Yeah, Netflix paid an insane amount of money, $100 million, to air it for just 1 year, which I would never, if I was on the board, it's like, no, we're not doing that. But that's how much they're still, the kind of money they're still throwing around for it. So
yeah, that is a lot of money. And certainly that's how much you would pay, to be honest with you, to make a movie nowadays. But that's an incredible amount of money. And I guess a good percentage of it went to the actors, because they have those great deals, that they got in their contracts at that time. Certainly, I have to say that the negotiations back then for this show, they talked about how, talking about, getting paid for your work, these guys started off with a small amount, but then towards the end, they were getting like $1 million an episode, which is.
I'm not sure if they would have been negotiating streaming residuals back then, though, because, that's one of the things they're on strike about right now. Because that's, because $100 million, that's a lot of money, because that was just paying for the rights to, to stream it for the 1 year. But we'll see. But that's a lot.
That is. And certainly, I don't know. It is something to think about. That's ironically, as you said, something that they're negotiating. But certainly, I guess those days are over with those big Residuals that we've seen in the past. We haven't really even seen anything except for some things on HBO like Game of Thrones and some other popular shows that would even pull that amount of viewers these days. But
Well, that's another
certainly.
thing, because I feel that the reason they're paying that kind of money for Friends is because the people who are watching it are the ones who have already seen it like several times over, because the show is a bit dated now. So I don't picture a lot of newer young people picking up on it and watching it as much as, say, the people who grew up with it. But those are the people who, and I'd imagine those people probably would have gotten the DVDs, or if not that, they would have bought digital copies by now. But there's still enough people out there who are still gonna, get a streaming service just to watch it. So
Absolutely. And the other thing I was going to say is that obviously the show launched a lot of careers. Jennifer Aniston became a household name, and so did Courtney Cox. And the rest of the cast as well. But certainly they all became household names. This show catapulted them to such heights. Many of them are still acting, and many of them went on to have very successful careers, especially Jennifer Aniston, who has made so many films after starring in Friends, and certainly is still very much making films and television. So it is interesting to see how this show affected so many people's lives that way. So moving on to the next topic, and I do want to send my condolences out to Matthew Perry's family, who I'm sure are quite devastated by this news here. Is this movie, Killers of the Flower Moon? Now, Catherine, you've seen the film. I've seen the film, and we knew what was going to happen in this film, in the sense of a lot of information was going to be shared about the film. So it's not necessarily a surprise what it's about or anything like that. And certainly the other thing I was going to say before I get too much into it is the notion of like, I think that the directors and the stars of this film are things that we already know, artists that we already know, who are fantastic. So, we're kind of like going into something where we knew it was going to be fantastic. It's Martin Scorsese, Leonardo DiCaprio stars in it, Robert De Niro, Lily Gladstone. I haven't really seen her in very much prior to this, but I guess maybe this might even be the first film I've seen her in. But I want to talk about, honestly, what you thought of the film. And let me see if I can just pause this for a second. What were your thoughts about Killers of the Flower Moon?
I thought it was good, but it's way too long, and it doesn't really focus on the conspiracy at large. It's mostly just talking about the Kyle family, and it doesn't feel like the atmosphere is suggesting that this conspiracy is as big as it is. Which is odd, because when you read about it, it's like it was very widespread, not just in terms of other murders, but the way the land was getting swindled from them in all sorts of different ways. And yet the movie doesn't really go into any of that. It's just following the one family. And I get that they did change the script quite a lot, because originally DiCaprio was supposed to play the Jesse Plemons character, the FBI agent, and it was going to be centered around him and the whole investigation. And then he changed his mind and said he wanted to play Ernest Burkhart. So they had to rewrite the script from top to bottom, and that's when the studio backed out, because they didn't think it was going to be as marketable. And so that's when Apple picked it up. But maybe it just feels long because he's such a horrible person. But it does go on, and I think De Niro gives probably one of his best performances in a long, long time. I thought he was really good in this movie. Lily Gladstone was great as well. But again, it mostly focuses on the 4 murders encompassing the Kyle family, and the couple murders on the side related to that. But I had to do more research afterwards about how widespread this was, and like how exactly the guardianship program was working, and how that was being abused, and how they were getting the land, how they would be having to give up their allotments to pay debts because they were being charged up the yin yang by all the local businesses, and how some guardians were not only administrators of their estates but creditors against the same estates. And again, this is the stuff they don't really go into. And it's funny because Scorsese has been talking a lot about this stuff on the press junket, but none of that's really in the movie. And the performances are good. The set design, fantastic. The directing's good. It just feels like it just goes on and on and on. And like, it doesn't feel like a movie that really needed to be 3 hours, 22 minutes long. but I've seen it twice already. It is quite good. I don't know if unless Apple lets Criterion do a release, like a physical media release, because Apple usually doesn't put their stuff out on physical or digital. They just keep it in house at Apple. And maybe that's why the movie's so long, because it's like, oh, the streaming age. People are just going to watch it. Made for mostly streaming anyway. People are going to watch it at home and binge it. But yeah, I think DiCaprio is clear the most evil role he's ever played in any movie, for sure. I thought it was very bizarre that Scorsese was talking about it like it's a love story. I'm like, okay, maybe from the wife's perspective, she kind of is in love with him in the beginning, but no, you can't conspire to murder your wife's entire family for money and seriously say it's a love story. It's like, no, Martin, it's not. What would you think of it?
Yeah, I agree pretty much with everything you said. And it's a beautiful looking film. And I think that the performances are spectacular. And certainly it feels appropriate to the time. It's a period piece. And, I love anything like that. I could just looking at that time period, it feels very authentic. And it is quite shocking to see it's kind of like you see the setup to a lot of the killings, whether it's discussed, which it is at length, or, you kind of see there's one scene with the guy who's, I guess maybe he stops along the side of the road, says there's something wrong with his car. Another guy comes along, tries to help him, and then ends up getting shot. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of like these sort of like, I'm not going to say hit and run, but these sort of like these setup situations where someone is outside and, they trick them and then they shoot them. And we do see a lot of killings. Like it's filled with death. And, a lot of times, what the thing, I guess the biggest, one of the questions that I think a lot of people might be wondering, at least I was wondering, is the notion of after a while, after all of this happening, and as you mentioned, it's a widespread problem. And, after so many, it was almost as if, how could you sleep at night? Would you stay there? These are sort of questions that I think a lot of people would ask. And of course, it's not a criticism of the people who had to go through this experience, but it was something that I wondered about. Certainly,
Well, they did mention once that the reason people were moving to town was because a lot of the murders were happening out in the more rural areas surrounding Fairfax where the Osage were living, but when they felt safer because when they were clustering in a town. But even then, the atmosphere of every time they go to town doesn't feel like a sense of dread, which I imagine there would, because even though this was going on from the early 1910s till early 1930s, the period from 1921 through 1926 was referred to as like the reign of terror, because that's just how prevalent it was at that time, practically endemic. But I just don't really feel that while I watch the movie. And most of the events of this film take place from 1921 through 1923, but they don't really do a great job of cluing you in on the timeline of events. The most you have to go off of in terms of aging is his Ernest and Molly's kids, because they're all still really young. So you figure, okay, this is probably happening within a couple of years' time. But and it's funny because the De Niro character there, his character in real life is 47 at the start of this movie, like 1921 when this starts. But you look at photos of him and he looked just as old as De Niro did at the time, which is kind of crazy. But that was my takeaway from it. I thought De Niro was so good in this movie.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that he has excellent chemistry with DiCaprio, and certainly that was one of the things that was lovely to watch, as they seem to have so many conversations about this master plan, if you will. At least that's how I'm going to say it. It was a huge master plan that took a lot of people to orchestrate and pull off, but it did feel. I mean, I'm not going to say necessarily. It felt like. It felt like almost the Wild Wild West, even though I guess it wasn't. But it felt that way. It felt as if they were behaving as if there were no rules. And I think that came across very well because they were so confident in their actions to supplant people from their land and just outright murder them.
Well, I think the sheriff was in on it. The people from the allotment office run it. Everybody was in on it. And I also think it helped the look of the film that he actually shot the whole thing in Osage County, which is nice because very rarely does a historical drama actually get to film at the places where they took place, because usually it's changed so much, but in this case, no.
Yeah, I agree. Those are not pertaining to what we want to see. But to be honest with you, Catherine, like I said, I wasn't quite sure how it was going to set and how it was going to rest. And, I think one of the things that I noticed about the film is that there was a lot of attention to detail to get it culturally correct. And, for what we've seen in the past, a lot of times you can't get everything 100% the way you feel it would be accurate, but this one feels spot on right. I feel like I'm looking at these actual people and their culture, and it does feel as if this is the authentic turn. Now, there might be somebody who says it's not, but for me, this looks very good. And I think they spent a lot of time focusing on trying to make things look authentic to the time period and to the culture at that time. And perhaps, Catherine, perhaps part of the culture too was to not say anything. The notion of, not wanting to cause trouble or stay away from certain things. I have no idea what it must have been like to be alive in the 1920s, but there may be like this situation or a feeling where, you don't, you can't, or there shouldn't be a time where you speak up and say certain things. So I'm not going to say that isn't something to think about, because certainly the way that people communicated back then is very different from the way we communicate now. Now, the other thing I was going to say is I agree with you on the length of the film. It did feel like it went on for a long time. Was I surprised by the fact that everything was controlled by other people? It was almost as if they were miners in a town, but they were the owners of, the mine, but they were restricted from doing anything. And it was very interesting. I think that they were given just a little bit to keep them at bay all the time. And, certainly they were tricked, but I'm not quite sure what the film's goal is. I think that if they were trying to tell us a story about, probably hundreds of people who were killed, this is one family, but I'm saying if perhaps it's even hundreds who were killed and had their properties taken away from them in this manner, I understand what that means in a sense. However, I'm not quite sure if the main focus of this film was just more on production value than anything else. And I think they hit it, they knocked it out of the park with this production value. It's beautiful, it's stunning, the actors are amazing, but a lot of the main story, as you said, Catherine, that you felt they should have talked a little bit more about how widespread this situation was lost in the film. I didn't get that from the film at all. It just felt like,
because it's like early on when they have there's a brief montage early on showing the random killings and how there's no investigations going on. But then you don't hear about the rest of that until very late in the film when the FBI agent meets with the other tribal chiefs. And they're like, our numbers are down in the scores in the hundreds. And it's like, well, why are we not feeling that? Like, where have the chiefs been throughout this whole 2.5, almost 3 year period the film is taking place over, where it doesn't, like, what was going on exactly? Like, we don't really know, because it's like it's telling the story of the Kyle family, which again was well documented because the author was able to track down and interview the granddaughter of Molly and Ernest, and she was telling him the story, and so that was the family he backed up, even though he discovered when digging up old records just how much more widespread it was. But you're right, the goal of the movie, it's like, okay, you're telling the story of the Kyle family, but as much as they're saying in the press junket how they're shining a light on all of this, it's like, well, are you really? Because it's not really even in the film, they don't mention the fact that the reason the FBI went down there wasn't so much because they cared about helping the Osage. It was because J. Edgar Hoover was trying to make a name for himself at the FBI, and he needed a big win, and so he sent him down there. It's like, you better solve this thing. But even then, they only solved a small portion of it, because, I mean, sure, King Hale was involved in some insurance scams on probably more than one person. That's the only crime he ended up going to prison for, was the conspiracy to murder Henry Roan. But you're right. It's like, I'm not really clear what the goal of the movie is. Is the way they talk about it on the press junket is if we're going to educate people about this horrible thing that's been going on and how widespread it is, but that's not at all what the movie's really focusing on. It's just this family, and people have said, did you really need to tell the story from the perspective of him, Ernest? It's like, shouldn't it be more from the perspective of the Osage, like maybe the tribal chiefs or something, rather than these despicable guys, So I agree that I'm not really sure what the goal is. And then he made a very deliberate choice of how he wanted to end the movie, which I was not a fan of, with the Lucky Strikes FBI radio drama adventures, and it's like
I hated it. I
I
hated it
hated that.
so
It's like I know
disrespectful.
that King Hale finagled 4 trials out of that before he finally got convicted, but it's like I feel that with everything they've been showing us, we should have at least dramatized the verdict. Because I noticed that there were people on that jury who were his friends, and I recognized who were in on it, who were at the backroom meeting with his lawyer, trying to talk Ernest into recanting and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, how did that? Well, if he's got all these friends on the jury, then how did he end up getting a guilty verdict? It's like it felt so almost kind of lazy. Like he just got tired of telling the story. It's like, well, we're just going to sum it all up, and this happened, and we're not going to be clear about the dates because, like for instance, Ernest and his brother who never did go to jail, Byron, they lived all the way until 1986, which is crazy to think about in that trailer park in the north of the county. And it's like, and King Hale living for another 15 years, not dying until 1962, and looking at the dates for all, and it's just how crazy. And apparently the granddaughter, who was the source for a lot of the information for the story in the book, met him, her grandfather, when she was a teenager, shortly before he died, and like, oh yeah, he plays the role of the kindly, innocuous grandfather. But she's like, I wonder how many cousins I would have had if it weren't for you. And how he told an interviewer once, he had the gall to tell him, oh, I'm as innocent as you, I was just a messenger, I didn't do nothing. It's like, I can't with these people. And then so you kind of want to, given that I know obviously that it isn't the happiest of endings because so many people got away with it, but since the movie isn't really shining a light on that, maybe you should have just shown it anyway instead of doing the radio drama thing, which is just so disappointing. It's like, that's just, I
Well,
hate that ending.
I think that the radio drama set the wrong tone.
Yeah.
And I'm also like a little confused as to why they felt that that was a good delivery of information. I think what might have been interesting would have been to see like an FBI scene and kind of like, good, we got what we wanted, great, and then they just kind of throw the newspaper down on the floor, and then maybe flips to obituaries or whatever, and then you just see so many names of people from that, or even many of the victims who fell prey to this scam.
Right, because the way they play it up in the radio thing is almost like it's a happy ending, because
Like it's entertainment almost.
yeah,
And
and it's true that that's what that radio show was meant for, because Hoover was very much a self-promoter later on, but it's like, uh, and I get maybe you're trying to make it seem, oh, look how horrible it is that they're turning it into entertainment. It's like, well, it doesn't feel like that shouldn't be the concluding part of the story. You should still conclude the story and the cases as we were watching it, and then you could do that in that whole insensitive thing later on. Because as it is, the final scene of the film, which is not spoilers because it's history, is when she confronts Ernest about, like, did you poison me? And of course she knew that already, her doctor. And that's another thing, I can't believe the movie skipped the scene inevitably where the doctors of the hospital had told her, well, this is insulin, this is something else, and oh, you say he was giving this to you? And what her shocked revelation must have been, because she was still a firm believer that he loved her all the way until the very end, even after he got arrested and was confessing to doing these horrible things, which in reality wasn't exactly true. She apparently was completely disgusted by him and couldn't even think to look at him after he admitted to conspiring to murder her sisters. And whereas the movie makes it seem like she was still interested in him for some reason, which I don't know why they made that choice, but
that's a good point, Catherine. I wondered myself, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. I wondered myself why they took that tone where she was kind of very carefree with him, and, almost as if she felt that I guess maybe he was protecting her, when it was very clear that there were suspicions about what was going on. There was no reason for her to trust him in a lot of these instances. And, like it was just really the wrong tone, I think.
yeah.
In what was going on. And I just don't believe that was the correct way to portray this, because it's like I said, it's almost implying that, so then no one says anything. Do I really believe that nobody said anything in 1923? No, I don't. I think a lot of people tried to bring it to someone's attention, and there was a lot of vocalizations.
Well, yeah, because they did. It is true that the tribal chiefs did raise a bunch of money, and they went to Washington D.C. and tried to make an appeal straight towards the president. And that's how Hoover found out about it, because it wasn't the president who sent everybody down; it was Hoover. And granted, Molly didn't make that journey in reality; that was just for the movie. But when Hoover found out about it, because they were because like they sent that one investigator out there and they thought he robbed them of their money. When the FBI got involved, they told them, oh no, he got murdered. And they're like, oh geez. And that was something they didn't really cover. But and there was another incident they didn't cover where King also took an insurance thing out on somebody else, and he was giving him poisoned liquor, and they took him to a hospital to make it look like they cared. But this guy was smart, and he knew what was going on, and so he got a lawyer, a very famous lawyer at the time, married father of 10 kids, and told him what was going on. And he went on a train to get back to Washington to get federal help, and he got thrown off the train by, Hale's thugs or whatever. They didn't cover that in the movie. So I was kind of surprised with how long the film is, so many details and stuff that aren't in it. But yeah, you're right. It's like tonally, I don't get how they're trying to frame the message of this film, but it's all production value. It's like, that's really what the movie is.
Yes, absolutely, Catherine. And I think that, and certainly not discounting the effort that was put into it, because it's a beautiful looking film, but a lot of attention to detail was paid in portraying every group in this film is with as much accuracy as possible. And I almost think that that's more of a focus for what they were doing. They wanted to show and kind of give these people a face, if you will, more than anything else. However, the story does have that feeling where you're kind of, left a little empty because they have left out important information.
Now, did you feel like the movie was trying to get you to come around to Ernest's side when he started deciding, when he told off King in jail? He's like, no, they're not going to stand by you anymore, and I'm not either. Because I read a review from, I can't remember, it was one prominent critic who's like, eventually once everybody we care about is either dead or in jail, I'm like, wait a minute. The only two people who go to jail in this movie are really bad people. What are you talking about? And I almost felt like the movie was trying to get you to think that, oh, he's actually really a good guy who got manipulated by his uncle, and he actually does love his wife, like Scorsese's been saying and stuff on the junket. And that, like, did you feel that that's kind of like what the movie was trying to do? Because I mean, I was feeling a little bit like that on the second viewing. I'm like, this is really gross, kind of.
Yeah, it could be interpreted that way, especially when we have scenes of where they're talking and he's kind of slapping DiCaprio around, almost implying like he's defiant and he has to control him, and he has to get him back in line with the plan. I just don't believe that. I think if you're going to go all in, he went all in. He married a person that he was going to kill. This is all in. This is not like I'm a half-ass person and I'm not fully dedicated to this. This guy went all in, and you'd have to be like one of the master planners to say, this will work out for us, because as soon as everybody's gone, it'll be in my name. That was a deliberate plan. So he couldn't have been like this incredibly, I'm not saying he was incredibly timid, but I just don't believe, I think some of the conversations would have been more like, well, when things are over, how much am I going to get? I have to have like 90%. I think that's like whatever they might have agreed to before. He's like, screw that. I went all in. I'm getting 90. That's what I think the conversations would have been more like. And then, let's say the the De Niro character would be like, hell no, you're not getting that, and smack him around. You know what I mean?
Right, that's like when you tried to pay Blackie Johnson to kill him in jail. And he's like, how did that work out for you, Blackie? Well, shit, I'm here talking to you, aren't I?
Exactly.
Or like the other guy who's like, can I take an insurance policy out while I get paid for these kids if they die? Sir, you realize you've just given me reason to believe that if I give you this policy, you're going to kill your kids. Well, not if it's not legal, and not if I don't get the money. And I'm like, oh my God, these people. And they didn't mention it, but that guy granted full immunity for his testimony. Got killed in a police shootout in 1937, so it worked out. But it's like, yeah, I agree with you. I don't buy that. It's like, if he knows the scam is that we're going to get the head rights, well, then inevitably you're going to have to kill the wife so that way you can have control of the money over the kids. Because I would assume in that situation, the kids being so young, they wouldn't really be the ones controlling it. And so, like he mentions when he finds out that his youngest has died, that they took away my baby, so implying that he thinks that King had something to do with it, which he may have, as we know those doctors are really crooked. And almost like the movie's almost trying to frame him as if he was naive to the idea that they were going to come for him, and that King was going to come for him at the end. I'm like, are you kidding? You're literally poisoning your wife, and you could tell that it's not just slowing her down, that she's literally like on her deathbed, and you're like, oh, I didn't know. It's like, come on. It's like I believe I see your version 100%. They're probably arguing about the percentages and how much they're going to get. He's not remorseful. No way.
And the other thing that I want to mention, Catherine, is that sometimes when you make a film about a thorny subject, which this is a very thorny subject, I think that for this director, I think also what he's thinking is that he wants to do this in a more artful way. And sometimes it's not easy to make a thorny to do a story about a thorny subject in an artful way. So like we get these shots where we're zooming down in on the tribe, and they're in a circle and they're kind of beating the drum, and when you really kind of are looking at stuff like this, he's trying to show that cultural aspect and give you an idea of what was lost and how beautiful it was, that notion. But at the same time, you can't do two things at one time in certain films like this. It becomes very difficult. I think that he did pull it off, but it was at the expense of the main point, or having a sharper focus.
Right, because there are movies like that where they'll start with a particular protagonist and then they start going a certain way, and then the movie switches and goes to a different person to follow for a while. And I think that would have been better for this movie, because the more that it follows Ernest going into the third act, the more it feels like they're trying to change him and make him seem like, oh, he's seeing the light now. And it's like, no. Kind of like I do wonder what that original script would have looked like, where he was going to be the FBI agent, and because that would have been, I wonder if that would have been trying to heroically play up the FBI, or how that would have looked. But I do think it should have been more. And again, Molly becomes a very passive character. She's being like literally poisoned. But I thought it would have been better if they'd told more of the story from the Osage perspective. So I mean, I wouldn't pick it as Best Picture over other films that I've seen this year. For all those reasons that we just discussed, but it's still, as far as production values, it looks like one of the best films of the year still.
Yeah, and I think, Catherine, you made such a good point about how DiCaprio wanting to play something a little different. I don't like to see him necessarily play bad guys. I like him playing a good guy, but I think that what he wanted to make out of this role, he couldn't, because the script didn't necessarily support what I think he was hoping for. I think he would have liked to have had a role where, something more sinister. I'm not saying this is not a sinister role, but I think he was looking for something more sinister. And to be honest with you, the tone in the film did not necessarily reflect it as sinister as a tone as it could have been. And as I said, I really do think it's because they were looking for of a more artistic view of what's happened. And I don't blame them for this. I think it's very bold to go ahead and take this topic, go ahead and try and recreate this, go ahead and have like a respectful way of showing this culture, and then still kind of break it down and watch it fall apart. It's very difficult to do that and really kind of create something that maybe is spectacular. I think it's worth a watch, but I don't know whether I would call it one of my favorite films this year. I would say it's a good film, but it does fall a little short. And however, it's a beautiful looking film. I could see them get best cinematography. I could see them getting a lot of things like that. Maybe even best costume design. The costumes were beautiful.
Yeah, production design, costume design, cinematography. I could see it getting, and perhaps for sure, supporting actor nomination for De Niro. I think from what I've seen so far, I haven't seen all the best movies this year, but right now I'd say it's him and Robert Downey Jr. from Oppenheimer in that competition.
For best supporting, right?
Yes, for best supporting, because he was very good in that. I haven't seen De Niro that good in a movie in a long time.
Yeah, he really tends to take a role and make it his own. And I would even suspect that what we saw on the page is really Robert's interpretation. I'm not going to say he doesn't need direction, but I have a feeling that he didn't need direction for this one, Catherine. I think he saw this and he knew exactly how he was going to approach this. And he did it beautifully. And once again, I just marvel, like whenever he and DiCaprio are on the screen, it feels like stars are jumping off the screen, for me.
And that's the first time that, with both these guys being in so many Scorsese movies, this is the first time they're in one together, which is kind of neat.
It is pretty neat. And to be honest with you, I'd like to see them, and maybe even Lily Gladstone, the three of them, in another film. Now that's something that I'm kind of, this is pure speculation, but I'd like to see them like in another Western or something. Catherine, I think that the chemistry they had was remarkable. What do you think?
Yeah, that's part of what really sells it. Like you can see, like with De Niro, because much like they would tell you at the historical society over there. Oh yeah, everybody thought of him as the friend of the Osage, the grandpa. They called him the king of the Osage Hills, and that's how he plays the role in the movie, almost like a very grandfatherly type guy to everyone. And he speaks the language and all that. And even when he offers, I'm gonna add $1,000 to the reward money to catch whoever did this, and the tribal chief's talking about it, thanking the mastermind, right, sitting right there next to them. And so he did that really great job at that, and the chemistry that he has with DiCaprio was great, and even with Lily, she was really good in this movie, and I wish she had more of a prominent role, but obviously because of what happens to her, it's not able to happen. But and all her sisters, I thought were well cast, like with that screenshot you showed where they're all sitting at the party and they're all gossiping about the guys there. It's like that was really good.
Yeah, that's very realistic because that's exactly what we would be doing. You'd be checking out the different guys coming around, and I think, once again, that cultural aspect is beautiful to see.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly think that if that wasn't included in the film, it's definitely part of what the purpose of the film was. And if it wasn't included in there, I think it would have been a very different feel to the film. I don't know what it would have been like if they hadn't done that, but clearly everything was thought of.
And there were a ton of photographs from that era as well, which is also why they were able to authentically, recreate it. So that helped too.
Absolutely, Catherine. So let's see how this film pans out. I think we talked about reviewing. Let's see, we're going to do, Catherine and I may do a review of this film in detail, a deep dive of Killers of the Flower Moon right here on the Burnettwork. And I know I have up in the thing says Fallout TV show, but I don't necessarily, yes, they're going to make a Fallout TV show. Fallout's a huge game, Catherine, that I've been watching probably walkthroughs since I've never played the game. I've watched a ton of walkthroughs.
Either.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it. It's an incredibly popular game. I just hope this TV show comes out okay. But I wanted to talk about this other article. I haven't even looked at this article too much, but I did want to mention the article only because what is going on here? Only because it has to do with, and I know, you guys don't know this, but Catherine, Tom, and I are constantly talking about entertainment, aside from, let's say, the show. And certainly Tom Junior Jackson, our moderator here on the show, just purchased Prey. Perhaps you picked it up too, Catherine.
I do. I have it right over here.
And it certainly is a fantastic film. I'm just going to pop up this article about Prey. And I do want to get your opinion on this. Catherine's going to pop up her Prey. Let me just see if I can just do her. Can I do it? Catherine. Hold on. Just 1 second. Let me add you.
Yeah, I got the 4K Blu-ray set. Really nice. It blows the digital transfer out of the water. I wish there wasn't as much CGI in this with the Predator as there is. There really didn't need to be, because the two movies, they just did it with practical effects and it was like really cool. But this is still a really good movie.
Absolutely. I love this film. I think, as I said before, for me, the one of the things that I noticed about the film was that it certainly does focus on the chivalry of Native American men. And I really like that aspect where there's scenes where she's like, we've got to go out there. He's like, no, stay down. Like he's willing to take a bullet or whatever for her. And I just really like that because they seem so fearless. But Catherine, I sent this article over to you. I haven't read the entire article, but I thought it was interesting because they talked about Prey. And it says, Hollywood, please release your horror films in theaters, not in streaming. Now, this is very interesting because horror in particular is so great when you're in a theater and it's dark and they have that surround sound and, you're at that point where something's going to happen. And it's even looking at this, one of our best genres deserves the biggest screens. And here, of course, is a snapshot from Prey. That is the actress in Prey. I think it's really interesting when they talk about this. And of course, we know a lot of things have happened, why these things are in, the theater. But what do you think, Catherine? Do you think that we're losing some of the good effects that, like, especially for a movie like Prey, I would have liked to have seen that in the theater?
Yeah. And I think that because it might have something to do with the fact that the one preceding that was just so terrible and bombed so horribly that maybe they didn't have faith in it, and like, oh, maybe the franchise name won't be as popular. But then they found that it was being streamed so much and so many people were just getting these one-off subscriptions just to watch it, that they decided, oh, well, let's just finally put it out on physical media. And that's been selling through the roof like hotcakes. I mean, the special editions all sold out like that. And they probably made a ton of money on it. And so now they're going to probably be thinking twice before dumping something like that on streaming. Apparently, there was a new one which just went to Hulu, another horror story that that they dumped on a service in September that people were like, yeah, this is really good, you know? So it's like an unfortunate thing because it's like you would think that something which is made for streaming, you expect the quality to be less than what would be for a theatrical film, but that's not always the case. And it's like, well, you should have just put this out in the theater, because it's one thing if it's a series, because you're not going to release a mini series or whatever in a movie theater. But for a movie like this, especially since this is like a reboot, so to speak, it's not. I mean, yes, there is a connection to the other Predator movies there with the gun, but it's still, it's like, why did you do this? It's like this would have been a great movie to see in a theater.
It totally would have been. And I could see, I really didn't know what to expect from this film, Catherine. I didn't know anything about the details. And I think if I went in the theater and after seeing this, I would have walked out of that theater going, oh my God, that was great. Especially the performance of Dakota Beavers, who plays her brother in the film. And they don't, I think it's great the way that they do a lot of the cinematography in it, because there's a certain stillness to this film. And, as you're watching it and she's kind of, the young woman is going about her day, talking to her mother, talking about how she wants to do all these different things. And all the time, all the while, there's somebody with her, as she's walking around, it's her brother. And you can see how she kind of looks up to him. And I love that. Like, they flash onto him and you can tell, like, he's the GOAT, right? Like, he's good at everything. And who doesn't feel that way about, a lot of times you have a older brother or sister who's the best thing ever. And I said, this is really a nice feeling that they have. And I liked that it starts off with where she's actually pretty happy. And, she just wants to do things. She tries to do stuff. He gets it in one shot, like it's, it's cool to see these things because she has somebody to look up to. And I think that part of the story kind of added to it. But certainly this, the feeling, of course, the topography was not appropriate or right for where they live, but it was still beautiful, Catherine. I think for, a story that's told, that's supposed to be out in the wild like that, it looked great. Could you imagine how wonderful that would have looked on the big screen here? And I'm sorry about the advertisements. I don't have the pop-up ad blocker, but it's interesting. Here it says, I just want to read the one portion of the article, which I think you alluded to, Catherine. It says, after the Predator received poor reviews and made only, I wonder if this is Predator or Prey.
The Predator.
Yeah. Made only 160 out of an 88 million budget, meaning it wouldn't have seen a theatrical profit. When looking at this, it's easy to see why the franchise custodians were hesitant to take another risk. But not only did Prey have a modest budget of 65 million, it was a more satisfying movie that received stellar reviews, is easy to follow, doesn't shortchange itself up in a prospective sequels, and it has a killer hook. It does. I mean, there's maybe one thing in it that I probably would have changed. But even despite that, Catherine, I think they got a lot of things right, what fans want to see in this franchise. So I just thought it was an interesting article to look at. I think that what I'm hoping, Catherine, and I'm pretty sure you're thinking this as well, is that they're going to bring some of these movies back out. And I think we've been seeing a lot of that Fandango. What's the other one? Fandom events, Fathom events. We're going to see them bring back a lot of these films. And you mentioned, I think it was Smile might have been one that initially had done a certain amount, and then they were like, oh, it did really great, let's re-release that. And it didn't. I think that the cost for Smile was very low, so they were able to re-release it, and it was did very well. But hopefully we're going to see a demand for movies that may have premiered in streaming, coming out into the theater again. Let's hope we see those. It would. How cool would it have been for this like Halloween season to see Prey in the theater for, a 1 or 2 nights? I know I would have bought that ticket, Catherine. So
yeah.
But unfortunately, guys, that's all the time we have for tonight. I do want to thank Catherine for being here. Catherine, where can people find you?
You can find me Slice Snide, Letterboxd, YouTube, Instagram, and on Virtual Cantina Network YouTube channel, co-hosting Unifying Force every second and fourth Sunday of the month at 8 a.m. Pacific. And you can find me currently Thursdays on the Phantasmagorium show, hosting another series with Scott, Money, Murder, Minnesota, about the Fargo movie and TV series. So that's fun.
Absolutely, guys. Check out Catherine on the Phantasmagorian channel, on the Unifying Force, on the Virtual Cantina Network. Do check her out there. You can always reach out to her here on the Burnettwork. And guys, you can always find me here on the Burnettwork as well as Positive Fandom. I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson, who has his own YouTube channel as well. Guys, make sure you like and subscribe to Tom's YouTube channel. Tom, we are all goof people. Thank you so much for everything you do. And with that, I want to thank everybody in the chat for being here. Thanks so much for supporting the channel, guys. And remember, no matter where you are in the galaxy, always remember to please be kind. Take care.